Boker Tov. Today's daf is daf Ayin Zayin, and we look at Abaye on the bottom of Ayin Vavam and Beis. Hakol modim hecha di omar lichsheteitze chama min artika. He said that the get should be chal when the sun comes out. And here we start at daf Ayin Zayin. Lechinafka ka'omerla. If he dies before daybreak, then it's a problem of ein get liachar misa ki maisi balayla. If he dies before the sun breaks out, havi get liachar misa, and the get could not be chal. And the Gemara assumes the same halacha should apply in the case of a man who gives a get, and he says, if lo basi, if I don't come within the 12 months, the get should be chal. And he died before the 12 months. So the get can't be chal because by the time the 12-month period lapses, he's already dead and ain't get liachar misa. Also, al manashe teitzei chama min atika me'achshav ka'omar. But if, on the other hand, he adds al manas, the Omer of Huna Barav kala Omer al manas ka'omer me'achshav dami, we assume that al manas means me'achshav, so the get will be chal lemafreya. So when the sun comes out the next day, the get is chal from the time of the Nesina. He died at night after the Nesina, and therefore the get is chal. So where is then the machlokes between the Chachamim and Rabosenu in our Mishlo? Nechleku says, Abaye ela be'im teitze. The case is where he said to his wife, Hareze gitech im teitze, if the sun will break out, if it will come out. Or if he says, Hareze gitech im lo basi. Mar savar la ke Rabbi Yossi. The Tana, the Brisa holds like Rabbi Yossi. The Omar, Zman shel shtar mochiach olav havle ke Omer. It's as if he said, Me'ayom im mati, or keme'achshav im mati. So the Zman of the shtar, according to Rabbi Yossi, testifies to the fact that the get should be chal l'mafreya from the time written in the get, and therefore the get will be chal. But Mar, the other Tanna Mishnah, lo savak Rabbi Yossi, he never accepted the position of Rabbi Yossi and the principle of shtaro zmano shel shtar mochiach olav v'havile ke'im mati greda. It's exactly like a case where he says im mati, and the implication of im mati is that the get will not be chal until the time as he dies, and at that time he's already dead and ain't get lachar misa. The Mishnah says kisvu tnu get liishti lo basi mikan ve'ad shnei masar chodesh. Because when they wrote the get within the 12 months, and then they delivered the get after the 12-month period, Tanakama holds Eno get, and Rabbi Yossi says that since he was makdim and he started with the word kisvu, instead of starting with the imlo basi, therefore we assume that he would commission the writing of the get even within the 12-month period, and therefore the get is kosher. There was no violation of the commission of the Baal. Should we assume that Rabbi Yossi holds kosav get al t'nai kosher? Anytime a person writes a get through tzivui abal, the Baal commanded him to write a get, and he adds a t'nai, whatever that t'nai might be, even if the t'nai was not makuyam, the get is kosher. No. That can't be. Lo. If the get was not written according to the conditions stipulated by the Baal, then there's no tzivui Baal, there's no lishma, the get is possible. V'shani hacha. When does Rabbi Yossi allow for the get to be chal in a case of a ksiva al tanai? That's only in a case where shani hacha midahavi le'lemeimer. We're going to be medayik, carefully meticulously reading his language. If he would have said imlo basi, if I don't show up in the next 12 months, kisvu tenu, that would indicate that he wants the ksiva, the get, to be conditional on the fact that lo basi, and it would only take effect at the end of the 12 months. However, the omar kisvu tenu imlo basi, but in the case where he started with not the Tanai, but the commissioning of the writing of the get, Hachikara, here's how Rabbi Yossi will interpret his tzivui. Kisvu me'achshav, write the get now, and imlo basi, and then the Tanai was makuyim, then tnu, imlo basi, give the get. and therefore it's kosher even though the get was written before the Shnei Basar Chodesh elapsed. For Rabbanan Savri, the Rabbanan hold, Lo Shna Hachi, Lo Shna Hachi. There's no difference between he was Magdim the Tanai and he said Im Lo Basi and then Kisvu Tanu, or the other way around, he said Kisvu Tanu Im Lo Basi. In both cases, his Kavana is that if the Tanai is Mekuyam, and after the 12-month period of Lo Basi elapses, then the get should be written. But if the get was written before the 12 months, then it wasn't written al pitzivi abal, the get is possible. We learned in a brayso. What if a person says, Areza gitech im lo basi li achar shavua? And we have to emphasize the word li achar. So shavua means the 7 years of the Shemitah cycle, but he said li achar. So what is li achar is? Shana. It's as if he had added another year. So li achar shavua means into the 8th year of the Shemitah cycle. So if he shows up within the 8th year, there's no kiyum tanai, and the get is bought. But if he says li achar shana, again emphasizing the word li achar, after a year, then it means chodesh. It means a full month after the year. That's 13 months. So that means that if he shows up within that 13th month, or call it the month after the shana, then the get is bought. If he says liachar chodesh, what does he mean by liachar chodesh? It means Shabbos. It means a month plus 1 week. A Shabbos is a week. The Gemara now clarifies, what if he says liachar Shabbos? How many days after Shabbos is included in the phrase liachar Shabbos? My Yosef Rav Zera Kamed Rav Asi V'Amrle Rav Asi Kamed Rav Yochanan V'Komar Chad B'Shabsa Utrei Utlosa Basar Shabsa. The first day of the week, that's Sunday and Monday and Tuesday, these 3 days are considered liachar or basar Shabbos, and therefore, if within those 3 days after the week he shows up, the get is bought. But arba v'chamisha mali shabsa. But once you get to Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, kami shabsa, that's already connected to the next Shabbos, the following Shabbos, and therefore it's not included in this Tanai of liachar Shabbos. Tanya, we learned in a brayso. Rebbe Omer liachar haregel. If he says that in lo basi ad liachar haregel, how do we interpret the liachar haregel? Shloshim yom. The 30-day period past the regel is considered liachar regel, and therefore if he shows up within that 30-day period after the regel, the get is bought. Nafak Rab Chia Joshua Mishmei de Rabba v'Kilisua. Rab Chia Darshan in the Beis Medrash, this shmur, the name of Rebbe. Rebbe here is a das yachid, and that's why Rab Chia emphasized that this is the halach of Rebbe. And Kalsua means Shimchu Chachamim, they were very happy. Why? Because then it's indicative of the fact that although that was Rebbe's shita, we don't paskin like Rebbe. And therefore, when Rabbi Chia went out and he said Bishmei de Rabim, as if to say that this halacha was accepted by the majority, lo kilsua, they weren't happy with that, because they hold that this opinion of Rebbe is a das yochid, and we paskin like the Rabim against Rebbe. Amal les hilchus kavase. We see that we don't paskin and we don't accept the shita of Rebbe. Now, the Gemara doesn't clarify exactly what would be the alternative to Rebbe shita. How long of a period of time after the regel is still considered liachar regel? If it's not 30 days, because we're rejecting Rebbe's psak, so what is it? And apparently it's 15 days. That's the shita of the Rabbeinu Chananel. And apparently based on a Gemara in Psachim, where the Gemara says that 15 days before the regel, we darshan the halachas of the regel. And therefore, the 15-day period, whether it's before the regel or after the regel, which means half of the 30-day period, that's considered the attachment to the regel, and that's liachar regel. Hadran alecha misha achsa. And now we begin the 8th parak of Gittin, which is Hazorek. Hazorek get li ishto b'sof beso b'sof chatzera rezu megoresh. But you have to add one stipulation. When is a get kosher if it was placed by the Baal or thrown by the Baal onto the karka of a house or a chotzer. That's only he betoch beisa or betoch chatzer. She's got to be there, and that's because chatzer has to be dumya de yada, and just like yada is smucha, so too chatzer has to be smucha. And now she'll be kona the get with a kinyan chotzer. Chotzer is kona. Why is chotzer kona? We'll see later on Daf Ayin Zayin and Beis. Zerakola betoch beso or betoch chatzero. Now, instead of throwing the get into her chotzer or her bias, he throws it into his bias or his chotzer. Afilu hu ima b'mita. Even if he throws the get onto her bed, on the bed that she's sleeping on. Now, keep in mind, just like the bias belongs to the Baal and the chotzer belongs to the Baal, so to the mita belongs to the Baal and a megureshes. Because he has to give the get into her hand, or at least into her reshus, that her chotzer could be kona, which he didn't do. However, when it says in the pasuk v'nasan biyada, it doesn't have to be biyada. It could be l'toch cheka or l'toch kalsa, harei megureshes. Cheka means some sort of a garment that she's wearing on her chest. And that's considered like a nesina legufa. And what's kolsa? Kolsa is a sal sha'anoshe b'nichos bo clay tfira. So they put needles for sewing into this particular kind of a basket. And the get went into that basket, and the get is chal. Even though the basket is where? It's being worn by the Isha inside his house. And that's because kolsa is considered like yada. Even though normally kolsa has a din of a chotzer, and who says that the Baal allows her to set up a chotzer within his rishus and his bias? But the answer is a person is not makpid on the place that she puts the kolsa. So the kolsa and the makom kolsa is kanula, it's hers. That makes it rishusa, and therefore she could be konan pechatzer, and it's as if he put it in her hand. The Gemara says minani milus. How do we know that a chotzer is kona forget? Now we're going to have here two brisos, one with regard to get, and the other with regard to kneva, and the Gemara is going to ask why we need both. The nasan biyad, ainli ella liyada. I might think that he has to put the get into her hand. And if he puts it into our rishus, but it's not in our hand, it's not megureshes. For example, gaga, chatzera, karpefa. These are various parts of her rishus, on her roof, or her chatzer, or the rishus hamukefes gader. Is minayin. How do we know that that's also an extension of her yad, and the get is chal? Tamid lomar, because the Torah says v'nasan b'chol makom. So the Gemara says, "V'nasan mikol makom." Let's try to understand what v'nasan mikol makom is. If the Torah would have said the word biyada first, if it would have said biyada titein haget, then it would mean that the get has to be dafka biyada, because the first word in the sentence, in the pasuk, is the emphasis. But instead it says v'nasan. And since the Torah put the word v'nasan first, it gives you a broad definition of v'nasan, which is called a klal. And then when it says biyada, that's called a prat. And we have a principle, ein b'klal ela masha b'prat, meaning that anything similar to the prat is included in the klal. So anything similar to biyada is included in v'nasan, and that's called v'nasan mikol makom, and that expands her ability to accept the get from anything, from the yad to anything that's mishtameres, that she has control over, like her chutz. V'tanya nami hachi, we learned thusly in a brisa, And it says in the Brisa L'gabe Ganav that a Ganav also can make a kinyan through Chotzer. The Torah says, "Motzei biyado hagneva shnayim yishal." And I might think that since it says biyado, it means he stole it with his hand, and then he's chayav kefel. Ein li ella biyado gago chatzer v'karpefo minayin. How do you know if he, let's say, he causes the animal by dragging it to go into his chotzer? So he didn't make a kinyan with his yad. How do we know that also qualifies as gneva and therefore he's chayav kefel minayin? Talmud lomar he motzei mikol mokum. And the extra word timotze is coming to expand the definition of the Masechet gneva for chiv kefel to include even the case of chatzer utzrich. And I need both kinyan chatzer and get and kinyan chatzer and gneva. Diash me'inon get, if we only had the chiddush of v'nasan mikol makom and get to include chatzer mishum debal karcha megarsha, since she doesn't need das in order to acquire her get, and the get could be given even bal karcha. The Torah wants to tell me that any kind of gerushin, even if it means he didn't give it to a yad, but he gave it to a chatzer, is kon. So the kinyan with regard to get is much simpler, and it's more easily achieved than in the case of get. Avoganav delesa bal karcha. There's no such thing as ganav being chayav against his will. So, for example, if someone were to throw a gneva into his chotzer against his will, the ganav would not be chayav. So you need an absolute full-fledged kinyan on the part of the ganav, is emelo. Maybe the Torah would say that, you know what? It's got to be biyado and not bechatzera. V'iyash me'inon ganav, and l'chora we could have a kavachom if the Torah would have just told me timotzei in the ganav. So madoch in the ganav, which requires a das and a full-fledged kinyan, a chutz is considered like a yad. How much more so in the case of a get, where her clinching the kinyan on the get is even bal karcha, so you don't need a full-fledged kinyan. I would certainly derive the conclusion with the kavachom that chutz should be operative. No. I would have said mishum de kanse rachmana. The Torah wants to impose a knas of kefel on the head of the ganav, and therefore the Torah says even if he steals it through his chotzer, he deserves that knas. And he's chayav in kefel, also he's chayav in onsen. We'll get where there's no knas, emalo. I might think the Torah would not expand the definition of yad to include even chotzer tzrich. I need the pasuk of a nasan biyada mikol makom. The Gemara now raises the following kasha: chatzera. How could it possibly be that a man could divorce his wife by putting the get into her chotzer? Any nechasim, any property or possessions that she brings into the marriage or she acquires during the course of the marriage become nichsei malug. And nichsei malug means that the Baal eats the peros. So the Baal has rights to all her property, and those rights are called kinyan peros. Now, in the case of chotzer, let's say, for example, they would rent out her chotzer, then in the framework of the Takonos Chacham Ksuba, the Baal will collect the rental payments on the chotzer. Not only that, the fact that she made the kinyan on a chotzer, that doesn't exclude the Baal. Why? Because mashakansa isha kana baila. So whether or not she brought possessions into the marriage that she owned before the Nisuin, or possessions that she acquired after the Nisuin, the Baal acquires through nichsei malug of the ksuba a kinyan peros. So even though the guf on the chassim really belongs to the isha, but nevertheless the Baal is koned in the chassim as far as tashmishim are concerned, and as far as peros are concerned. So when he puts the get into a chotzer, then the chotzer is really koned to him as far as peros are concerned, and the get never left his rishus. Amar Rabbi Lazar says that the only way we could explain and justify a mishnah in the kinyan chotzer when the Baal puts the get into the chotzer, the isha, is because seif ladinu dvarim ein li ben chasayich. when the Baal wrote a document and handed it to his wife after the marriage, and he says, you know what? Dinu dvarim ein li b'chasayach. That's called siluk. He's removing himself from any possession of a chatzah, and therefore he no longer has a kinyan leperos. The chatzah is now totally hers. It's only her rishus, exclusively her rishus, and therefore she's kona again with the chatzah. Gemara asked, this is not true. I'm going to prove to you from a brisa that dinu dvarim ein li b'chasayach is not valid. Ha'omer l'chaver the brisa says dinu dvarim ein li b'sadazu al sadazu. A man makes a declaration that dinu dvarim ein li b'sadazu ein li esik ba yadei mesulekas menu any lashon siluk lo omar klub. He owns a chelik, a partnership in the sada. He can't be mafkia his bailus just through siluk. He needs a kinyan. So how could a Baal remove his rights and his ownership on the chutzner of his wife simply by writing her diru dvar me'li b'chasayach haloshin siluk? We need that the Baal has to be makna his kinyan to her, and because he's a shutaf in the chutzner, he has bailus of nichsei muluk called peros. Therefore, he cannot remove himself with dinu dvar me'li b'chasayach. A lashon siluk is not a lashon akna. The Gemara answers, Amri de Rav Yanai, bekosev la bi'oda rusa. He wrote her a star of dinu dvar me'li b'chasayach before he married. It was after Erusin, but before Nesuin. And he wasn't zoche in the peros of her karka or of chotzer, because that schus of nichsei maluk is triggered off and generated by the Nesuin, but now we're before the Nesuin. So a lashon siluk means that he doesn't want to be zoche after the Nesuin in the kinyan peros. And that's valid. Ukir Rav Kahana, the Omer of Kahana, Nachla bolo liyodom mimokom acher odom masna leshlo Yerushin. Whenever you have a Yerusha that's not a Yerusha Satorah, you're not inheriting your father's property, but rather the Rabbanan are giving you a gift. They are allowing you to inherit something, like, for example, Yerushas Ishto Lechar Mosa, or Achilas Peros of Nichsei Malug. All of this is called a Kinyan de Rabbanan, which the Rabbanan bequeathed to a husband in the framework of marriage. And if before he is actually Zochen, his Kinyan is not Chal, so he doesn't have the Kinyan Peros in the Nichsei Malug, because we're talking during Erusin, he could be Masna, he could make a Tanai that I'm marrying her, but I'm giving up on my rights that I would acquire by virtue of the fact that the Chachamim bequeath those rights to me. Here, Siluk would be operative. Ukid Rava, Rava, and this will be supported by the principle of Rava. Now, the reason why the Gemara, as we'll soon see on Daf Ayin Zayin of Beis, needs Rava, and it's not enough just simply to quote Rav Kahana, is because we have a problem that even if Siluk of Dinu Dvar Me'li B'chasayach operates before he was Zocher, but nevertheless you have another problem, and that is Ein Adam Makne Dover Shelo Baliola. So that these rights at the point of Erusin is still considered Dover Shelo Baliola. And for that, the Gemara needs to quote Rava. And we'll see Rava's statement, Omer, on Omid Beis,